A wealthy businessman kicks a poor little girl out of restaurant. When he discovers her true identity, the shocking truth leaves him filled with regret. The sun beat down on the bustling streets of Florida amid the chaos of vendors shouting and the aroma of tacos filling the air. James Kelly, the epitome of success, was seated in an elegant restaurant overlooking the main square at 45. James was a man used to power. His sharp suit, gold watch, and confident demeanor commanded attention wherever he went. He took a slow sip of his aged whiskey, his thoughts already consumed by the next big business deal that would add another fortune to his name. "Mr. Kelly, your lunch will be ready shortly," the waiter said with a polite bow. James barely nodded, already lost in his thoughts, plotting his next multi-million-dollar acquisition. At that same moment, just outside the restaurant, an 8-year-old girl named Emily walked the streets barefoot, carrying a small box of gum in her hands. Her tattered dress fluttered in the breeze as she searched the crowd for potential customers, every step driven by the need to earn money. For her sick mother, today felt no different from any other day, but fate had something else in store for her. James, from his seat inside, glanced absent-mindedly out the window, and his eyes landed on Emily as she skillfully maneuvered through the crowd. In a matter of seconds, she was inside the restaurant, having slipped past the guards unnoticed. Her large, curious eyes met James's, and for a moment everything seemed to pause. She stepped forward without hesitation. "Would you like to buy some gum, sir?" she asked, her voice soft but determined. James frowned, annoyed by the interruption. "Can't you see I'm busy? Go away before I call security." But Emily didn't move. Her eyes held a strange intensity that caused James to pause. "Please, sir, my mom is very sick and we need money for her medicine. But that's not the only reason I'm here." James's irritation gave way to curiosity. "Oh, and what other reason could there be?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. Emily took a deep breath, as though steeling herself. "I have something important to tell you, something that could save your life." The words hung in the air, heavier than the girl likely understood. James, despite his initial annoyance, felt a flicker of intrigue. He was a man who had heard many lies and false promises in his life, but there was something different about this. "Child saved my life," James repeated, half amused. "How exactly is a little girl like you going to do that?" Emily looked around, aware of the stares from the other diners. "I can't say it here," she whispered, leaning in closer. "It's a secret, but if you listen, you'll understand." Against his better judgment, James gestured for her to sit. "You've got 5 minutes," he said. "If this is some trick, it's not." Off, her voice shaking just slightly, she sat down carefully, as if the offer might be taken away at any second. James crossed his arms. "All right, speak." Emily's story began haltingly, but soon it flowed like a rushing river. She spoke of strange dreams and visions, images and names that James hadn't heard in years. She described personal moments, buried secrets that no one else could possibly know. As she talked, James's expression shifted from skepticism to shock. How could she possibly know all these things? His breath caught when Emily mentioned a name from his past, one he hadn't thought about in decades. "And that's why, Mr. Kelly," Emily concluded, her eyes locked on his. "You have to be careful. Something terrible will happen if you don't change your ways." For the first time in years, James was rendered speechless. The world around them, the restaurant, the noise, the people, seemed to disappear. It was just him and this mysterious girl. "Who are you?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily smiled, a smile full of wisdom far beyond her years. "I'm just a girl selling gum, but sometimes the answers come from the places you least expect." The moment was broken by the waiter returning with James's lunch. When he looked back, Emily was gone, leaving only her box of gum on the table and a swirl of unanswered questions in his mind. James stared at the food in front of him, his appetite forgotten, his thoughts spinning in 1,000 directions. How had this girl, a child from the streets, shaken the very foundation of his world? The day that followed were a blur for James Kelly. Emily's words echoed in his mind, disturbing his sleep, clouding his focus. In the middle of a board meeting, he found himself lost in thought, her voice replaying over and over. Eventually, he couldn't take it anymore. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. "Hello," a woman's voice answered, tentative and familiar. "Isabel." James began, his voice trembling. "It's me, James." There was a long pause before she responded. "James, after all these years, why now?" James closed his eyes. "Memo. But if there's even the Slightest chance that our daughter is alive. Don't you think we should investigate? Isabel stopped her eyes. Meeting James's in his gaze, she saw something she hadn't in years. Vulnerability, regret, and a glimmer of hope. And if it's true, James continued, what if our daughter has been out there all this time, waiting for us to find her? Isabel sat down slowly, tears streaming down her cheeks. If it's true, how would we ever find her? And how could we explain why we never looked for her before? James shook his head. I don't know. But we have to try. I to her and to you. While the couple talked across the city, Emily returned to her modest home. Her mother, Evelyn, greeted her with a tired smile. How did it go today, my child? Evelyn asked, hugging her daughter tightly. Emily smiled back, but her eyes held a wisdom beyond her ears. Good, Mom. I think I did something important today. And Evelyn kissed her daughter's forehead. I'm sure you did, my love. You always do important things. That night, while Emily slept, Evelyn sat beside her bed watching her daughter's peaceful face. Gently, she touched the locket that Emily always wore, a gift from her grandmother. Oh, Mom, Evelyn whispered into the air. If only you knew the gifts your granddaughter has. If only you knew the secrets she holds. At that moment, as if answering a silent call, Emily opened her eyes. Mom, she said sleepily, I had another dream. Evelyn leaned in closer. What did you dream about, my love? I dreamed of a couple, Emily replied. They were sad but also hopeful. And there was a baby, Mom, a baby who got lost, but now they want to find her. A shiver ran down Evelyn's spine. It's just a dream, Emily. Go back to sleep. But as Emily closed her eyes, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. Something that would change their lives forever. Back at the cafe, James and Isabel had made up their minds they would search for the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Where do we start? Isabel asked. James reached into his pocket and pulled out the pack of gum Emily had left at the restaurant. We start with her, the girl who seems to more than she should. As they left the cafe, neither noticed the man watching them from a parked car across the street. The man pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Sir, he said when the line connected, we have a problem. Kelly is asking questions about the past and Hun not alone. On the other end of the line, a cold voice responded, take care of it. We can't let the truth come out. Not now. The man hung up and started his car, discreetly following James and Isabel. The search for the truth had begun, but with it, so had the dangers lurking in the shadows of the past. James and Isabel's search for the truth led them down a path filled with shadows and dangers they never imagined. Days turned into weeks as they followed every lead, every rumor, every loose thread from their shared past. One rainy afternoon, James was in his office sifting through old documents when his assistant rushed in. Mr. Kelly, there's someone insisting on seeing you, he says. It's urgent. James looked up, intrigued. Who is it? An older man. He says he worked at the hospital where your daughter was born. James's heart skipped a beat. Let him in immediately. Moments later, a man in his 70s with gray hair and tired eyes entered the office. He introduced himself as Dr. Ramirez, a former pediatrician at the hospital. Mr. Kelly, the doctor began, his voice trembling slightly. I've carried this secret for far too long. When I heard you were investigating your daughter, I knew it was time to speak. James leaned forward, his heart pounding. What secret, doctor? What do you know? Dr. Ramirez took a deep breath before continuing. Your daughter didn't die that night, Mr. Kelly. She was stolen. The words hit like lightning in the room. James shot to his feet, knocking his chair to the ground. What are you saying? How is that possible? There was a group, the doctor explained, his eyes filled with remorse. They trafficked babies, threatened my family. If I didn't cooperate, I helped them forge the death certificate. James felt the world spin around him. He had to brace himself on the desk to keep from collapsing. Who took my daughter? Dr. Ramirez shook his head. I'm not certain, but there's a name I overheard. Scott Vager, an old business associate, someone you once considered a friend, someone who mysteriously disappeared years ago. Meanwhile, across town, Isabel had decided to visit the local orphanage. Following a hunch, as she spoke with the director, an older woman named Sophia, a photo on the wall caught her eye. That little girl, Isabel said, pointing to the picture of a child around 5 years old. Who is she? Sophia looked at the photo fondly. That's Emily, a very special girl who stayed with us some years ago. She was Adopted by a woman named Evelyn. Isabel's heart skipped a beat. Emily, can you tell me more about her? As Sophia spoke, Isabel felt the puzzle pieces begin to fit together. Emily's age, her mysterious arrival at the orphanage, the dreams and visions James had mentioned back in James' office. The businessman was about to call Isabel when he noticed something odd. A small red laser dot appeared on his chest, slowly moving towards his heart. Get down, he shouted, diving onto the doctor just as a bullet shattered the window, embedding itself in the wall where James had stood seconds before. Chaos erupted in the building. Guards rushed toward the office as James and Dr. Ramirez crawled toward the door. We have to get out of here, James gasped. Someone doesn't want us to uncover the truth. As they fled down the emergency stairwell, James couldn't stop thinking about Emily. If his suspicions were correct, if she really was his daughter, she was now in danger too. At that very moment, Emily was walking home after selling gum. Suddenly a chill ran down her spine. She stopped, looking around cautiously. She saw nothing unusual but couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Emily, her mother's voice called from the doorway of their house. Come inside quickly, my girl. Emily ran to her mother, who hugged her tightly. What's wrong, Mom? She asked, noticing the worry in Evelyn's eyes. Nothing, sweetheart, Evelyn replied, though her voice trembled slightly. I had a bad feeling inside the house. Evelyn pulled all the curtains closed and checked the door twice to make sure it was securely locked. Emily watched her with curiosity. Mom, she finally said, does this have to do with my dreams with the man from the restaurant? Evelyn knelt in front of her daughter, taking her small hands in hers. Emily, my love, there are things I haven't told you, things about your past, about your real family. Emily's eyes widened. My real family? But you're my family, Mom, and you always will be. Evelyn said, her eyes brimming with tears. But there are people out there, people who've been searching for you for a long time. Before Evelyn could continue, a loud knock on the door startled them both. Open up, a man's voice demanded from outside. We know the girl is in there. Evelyn pulled Emily into a tight embrace, her mind racing to find an escape. She had always known this day might come, but she had never truly been prepared for it. Listen to me, Emily, Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. No matter what happens, remember that I love you and everything I've done was to protect you. The door shook under the weight of the pounding. Emily squeezed her eyes shut, focusing as her grandmother had taught her. In her mind, she saw flashes of James and Isabel, of a hospital, of a baby being taken away in the dead of night. And then, with a clarity that terrified her, she saw the face of the man on the other side of the door. Scott. Emily whispered the name, slipping from her lips before she even knew why. Evelyn's eyes widened in shock. How do you know that name? But before Emily could answer, the door burst open with a deafening crash. The truth, long buried, was about to come to light, and with it the dangers that had lurked in the shadows for 2 decades. The sound of the door giving way echoed through the small house. Evelyn, driven by pure maternal instinct, pushed Emily behind her, standing fiercely to face the intruders. 3 men entered, led by one with a deep scar running across his left cheek. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept over Evelyn and then settled on Emily. Scott, Evelyn said, her voice unsteady but determined. She had always known this day would come. The scarred man, Scott, offered a humorous smile. It's been a long time, Evelyn. I see you've taken good care of the girl. Peeking out from behind her, mother, Emma, stared at Scott. A flood of memories and sensations overwhelmed her. A dimly lit hospital, the cry of a baby, hurried whispers in the night without fully understanding why the words left her mouth. You stole me. Scott's expression flickered with surprise, but he quickly regained his composure. Well, it seems the little one has some special talents, he said, his tone dripping with mockery that only makes her more valuable. Evelyn clenched her fists. You won't take her, not after all this time. Oh, Evelyn, Scott replied, his voice heavy with false sympathy. You don't have a choice. The girl is the key to everything. And now that James is asking questions, we can't let the truth come out. Meanwhile, James and Isabel were racing through the streets of Florida, following the address Sophia had given them. James's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear and hope driving him forward. What if we're too late? Isabel chanted as they rounded a corner. We won't be, James said through gritted teeth. We can't be back at Evelyn's house. The tension was suffocating. Scott stepped forward, his men flanking him. You're coming with us, Emily, he said, extending a hand toward her. There's a lot you need to learn about who you really are. But Emily didn't move. Instead, she closed her eyes, concentrating deeply. The images in her mind grew sharper, more vivid. She saw James and Isabel at the hospital holding a baby. She saw Scott in the shadows making sinister deals, and she saw something else, something that filled her with a fierce resolve. When she opened her eyes, Emily locked her Gaze on Scott. I know who I am, I know what you did, and I know my real parents are. Coming for me. Scott's face was drained of color. How it doesn't matter, Emily said firmly. We're leaving now, Scott barked, motioning to his men who advanced toward Emily and Evelyn, but at that very moment the distant wail of siren filled the air, growing louder by the second. Damn it, Scott growled. Someone must have called the police. Evelyn seized the moment of distraction, grabbing Emily's hand and sprinting toward the back of the house. Scott and his men pursued them, but the brief head start was just enough for them to slip through the back door and dive into the maze of alleys in the neighborhood. Find them, Scott roared at his men. They can't escape. Evelyn and Emily ran hand in hand, zigzagging through narrow alleyways and backyard passages. The shouts and footsteps of their pursuers echoed closer and closer. Mom, Emily gasped as they ran. I'm scared. Evelyn squeezed her daughter's hand tighter. I know, sweetheart, but you're stronger than you think. Remember what your grandmother taught you. Emily nodded briefly, closing her eyes as they continued to run in her. She envisioned a path, a way out. This way, she suddenly said, pulling Evelyn toward a left-hand alley. Meanwhile, James's heart sank. Wick, too late, Isabel murmured, her voice thick with emotion, tears brimming in her eyes, but James wasn't ready to